Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your September 2023 astrological forecast. This is a bit of an odd month because we have so much energy that is holding its own space. It's not moving very fast. There are so many planets either retrograde or just about ready to go retrograde or just having turned retrograde, and planets that are retrograde that'll be going direct toward either during this month or toward the end of the month. We'll get to all that in a little bit, but usually I have this posted by the morning of the first of every month. I'm only recording this early in the morning of September 1st, and so this won't get posted likely until the second of the month. My apologies, it's just the way it is with all this retrograde energy. I got caught in a few swirls, or in backward swirls, if you will. I'll save you the anecdotes, but between logistics and computer stuff and whatever. And so I apologize for this being a day later than normal. Now, the Soul Food Astrology Night Live will be later this evening. By the time this goes up, that will have already occurred. So you may want to catch that if you want, also on YouTube. And that'll be on my channel on YouTube, and that'll also be up by Saturday, September 2nd. And so that's kind of makes this month a little bit unusual from a logistics timing standpoint. Before we jump into the month, I have my regular few things that I want to just let people know. Obviously, if you're not interested in this, feel free to fast forward through this. But just a quick reminder that on September 15th through the 17th, I'll be doing a keynote address for the Earth Wisdom Astrology. That's the Canadian Astrology Conference. That's up in Calgary, and the links for all of these will be down below. I'm just going to breeze through them really, really quickly. I'm also doing a Sunday afternoon post-conference workshop, and even if you don't attend the conference, you can still register for that and attend that separately, and that'll be on Sunday, September 17th in the afternoon. And I look forward to seeing many of you there. This should be a really fun conference. The second thing is the Liberating Venus, Love, and Abundance workshop, and that is about awakening the power to receive with astrology. I'll be doing this jointly with Rachel Lang, and Rachel and I have been scheming for years, talking about doing some sort of weekend workshop together. And this will be at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, just north of New York City, where I taught actually over the summer with Ann Ortley and Lynn Bell and Maurice Fernandez, and Rachel was there also. And this weekend, we'll be working on the concepts of Venus, using Venus to attract more meaningful relationships, to increase your abundance, and just embodying Venus itself. And it's going to be a really fun weekend. And Omega Institute is such a cool place. And I'm looking forward to seeing many of you there. That is, and I don't know if I said the date already, that is mid-October, October 13th through 15th, an eclipse weekend, actually. And again, the links will be down below in the comment, down below here, but also clickable links down in the comment section. I'll pin the comment to the top. The next thing I want to mention is, of course, Goa, which I've been talking about for a while. Goa is a state in India, in the southwest part of India, on what's called the Malabar coast. Goa is a very interesting part of India. It faces the Arabian Sea, but it really wasn't a part of India until the 1960s. Prior to that, it was a Portuguese colony and trading city or area. And it's a very, very cool place. I've taught at the place where this retreat is going to be held. It's a 10-day retreat entitled Initiation into Astrology. I've done this long form before. It's a lot of fun. It's being sponsored by Heaven and Earth Workshops. I've done workshops for, I think this is my 11th workshop with Heaven and Earth Workshops. I've done workshops with them in Bali, Mexico, and India before. And this is going to be like a full immersion, including experiential stuff and astrodrama. And whether you're a beginner, advanced student, or even a professional, there'll be material here for everyone from one end of the spectrum to the other. And by going to heavenandearthworkshops.com, you can get the complete story, the day-by-day curriculum. It's going to be quite a week, and I am so looking forward to that one. I love this spot. It's just a quick walk down to a magical, very swimmable beach, beautiful beach, and it's in a part of India that is really very gentle and very easy to get around and to live in and to be in. And the facility itself is a place where I've stayed at before, and it's an Ayurvedic healing spa, and it's very, very cool. I also want to mention that in November, I'm going to be doing a class series with the Astrology Hub. And many of you know I've taught many courses through the Astrology Hub. And this is going to be Chart Reading Extravaganza 3. But the focus on this is going to be working with harmonic aspects and using harmonic aspects in interpreting charts. I know many of you have taken my harmonics aspects class series at the Astrology Hub, and for those of you, it'll be an application of what we learned in that course. For those of you who have not taken it or are new to harmonic aspects are aspects that just don't fit into the natural zodiac. So the harmonic aspects include quintiles, septiles, octiles, noviles, and as I like to say, infantiles and turnstiles and kitchen tiles and other tiles, the X tiles I call them. But this is going to be a really fascinating course that'll really open up your mind to the use of them. And rather than teaching academically about all of the aspects, we're going to jump in and do a handful of charts each week for 4 weeks. And the charts will be done of participating students who will be there. So you'll be able to hear them tell their side of the story of how these different harmonic aspects work for them as I look at their charts and also teach you how to work with them. You can go to astrologyhub.com/extra3. It's the extra extravaganza 3. And get yourself on the wait list. In fact, if you sign up for the wait list now, even though registration isn't open, you'll get a gift. That's a harmonic aspects cheat sheet that you'll get right away just for putting yourself on the wait list with no commitment. And again, that link is down below. That'll be 4 weeks long in the month of November coming up. And I'm looking forward to this one because I love working with harmonic aspects. Even though I don't use them normally in my YouTube descriptions and forecasts of the month ahead with natal charts, I wouldn't ever do a client chart without looking at these aspects. That's how important they are. And I also, before I get into the material, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of you who are supporting my work on Patreon that allow this to be distributed freely and also support the other work, including the monthly chart interpretation classes and the apprentice program, and a mid-month update and other videos that come and go for you at various levels of participation. And if you're interested in supporting me there and getting those those goodies of my teachings, you can also find more about that at patreon.com/Rick Levine. Again, the clickable link will be down below. That's it. Thank you for indulging me in this. This is my chance to reach those of you who want to know about these things in a way that makes it sensible for me to actually distribute this to a much wider audience for free. So thank you, Patreon supporters, and thank you all of you who just come up and support this, and for all of you who get involved in the comments, because it's a very active discussion that we seem to have through the month in the comment section. So feel free to say hello there. All right, now, with no further ado, let's get into the month ahead, because September is a very peculiar month. Normally I go through these months and I look at what are the main transits of the month, and of course the lunations. We'll look at the both the Virgo new moon on the 14th and the Aries full moon on the 29th. And every month has some sort of kind of something that stands out. And the thing that stands out for the month of September is kind of an unusual one, because there's not much forward motion, but it feels like we're going somewhere. It's almost like we're caught in a riptide that's pulling us in some direction, but nothing is really moving very fast. And I'll explain why that is in just a moment. But it's a very peculiar month because of how many planets are either retrograde, or just having turned retrograde, or just ready to turn retrograde. And in fact, as we open the month, and let's bring up a chart for September 1st, and the chart that I'm bringing up for September 1st, as all my charts here have, has an Aries rising, which means that there's no houses that are useful, because your horizon, wherever you are on the planet, is different than my horizon here outside of Seattle. So we just use an Aries rising, which puts all the planets in their signs, in their natural houses. So as you look at this chart, for example, for September 1st, and all these charts will be for Pacific Daylight Time, and most of them will be for noon, unless I note otherwise, around the two lunations, the new moon and full moon. I will put up an exact timed chart, but all the charts that I put up are for noon, except for the new moon and full moon charts, and they're all Pacific Daylight Time. And you need to adjust your time zone for wherever you are. As we look at the chart for noon on September 1st, that's a Friday, we can see that at noon the moon is at 3 degrees of Aries, which means that the moon has just moved into Aries earlier today. And whenever I say today, I'm always referring to the chart that's in front of us. And so if I say today, it's September 1st, even though it really is September 1st today. But as we look at the chart for September 1st, we can see that Pluto is retrograde, Neptune is retrograde, Chiron is retrograde, Uranus is retrograde, Saturn is retrograde, and although Jupiter isn't retrograde, Jupiter turns retrograde on September 4th. And in fact, if you look at this chart, Jupiter is at 15 degrees of Taurus in 34 minutes. And in 4 days, when Jupiter turns retrograde, it's only at 15 degrees Taurus and 35 minutes. And so it's barely moved 1/60th of a degree in 4 days. And so even though Jupiter shows here as moving direct, it's for all practical purposes stationary. And we then look at Venus, and Venus is retrograde, and we'll talk more about that retrograde process in just a moment. Mercury is retrograde. In fact, the only planet that's not retrograde at the opening of the month is Mars. And that's what makes this month so unusual, so peculiar, is that Mars is moving faster than any other planet Normally, Venus and Mercury are moving faster than Mars, but because they are, in fact, retrograde, they are barely moving at all. And if we look at the amount of movement that each of the planets makes throughout the month, I mean, we start off, let's take this, the farthest out and work our way in. Pluto, which is at 28 and a quarter degrees at the beginning of the month, is only at 27 degrees and 55 minutes. That's really 28 degrees for all practical purposes. In other words, Pluto moves less than a third of a degree over the entire month, and it is retrograde. As we look at Neptune at the beginning of the month is 26 and 3/4 degrees, 26 degrees 45 minutes of Pisces, and by the end of the month it's barely moved back past 26 degrees even. It retrogrades back not quite a degree all month. And then as we look to Uranus, Uranus has just turned retrograde, and Uranus is at 23 degrees and 4 minutes at the beginning of the month, and it's only it retrogrades back to 23 and about a half a degree, 23 or 22 degrees and 37 minutes, which means that Uranus is moving just barely a half a degree for the entire month. And as we look at Saturn, Saturn is moving the quickest of all of these, and Saturn's at about 3.5 degrees at the beginning of the month, and at the end of the month it's about 1.5 degrees, so it moves about 2 degrees for the entire month. And Jupiter, which is just, as I said before, barely moving at all because it's just getting ready to turn retrograde, Jupiter retrogrades all the way back to 14 degrees, 22 minutes. That means that it moves backwards, retrogrades, just over 1 degree for the entire month. And even the faster moving planets, Mercury, which can normally move up to just about 2 degrees a day, almost twice as fast as the sun, Mercury is at 17 degrees 58 minutes at the beginning of the month. It's actually, let's call it 18 degrees. And at the end of the month, even though it does turn direct, Mercury turns direct on the 15th, the fact is that by the end of the month, Mercury is only at 24.5 degrees of Virgo. So Mercury basically moves about 7 degrees. It covers 7 degrees all month. And Venus, which is at 12 degrees and 18 minutes, about 12.25 degrees of Leo. At the end of the month, it's at 24 degrees of Leo, meaning that it moves about 12 degrees. Now, here's the most important thing. Mars, which has just moved into Libra, is at almost 3.5 degrees of Libra, 3 degrees Libra and 22 minutes. And at the end of the month, it's at 23 degrees of Libra, which means that Mars moves 20 degrees. Now, normally, that wouldn't be a big deal. But the fact of the matter is that Mars is moving faster than anything, obviously not compared to the sun or the moon, but it's moving faster than everything else, which makes it stand out in its potency all month. We begin the month with a quincunx between Mars and Saturn, and this sets the stage for, I think, the frustration. You know, Mars is normally assertive and direct and aggressive, and in Libra in its fall, because it's as far away from its home sign Aries as it ever gets, Mars has to be careful in Libra. Its strength is diplomacy. Its strength is, I like to even think of it as martial arts, because martial arts is fighting, but in an artistic and beautiful way. Mars in Libra forming that annoying adjustment-oriented quincunx to Saturn in Pisces basically says that there's something that's not working out by how much we want to move forward, Mars, even in that pleasant, nice, diplomatic way, cooperative way. It's just not sitting easily with the restrictions and the rules of Saturn in Pisces. And remember, Saturn in Pisces, the rules are a bit murky because it's water, and so the boundaries that Saturn normally has are a bit harder to find while Saturn is moving through Pisces. So this is an important statement about the beginning of the month. And other than that, the beginning of the month is relatively quiet, but as I said before, the action really does pick up, but the action really is from the inner planets to the inner planets because of how slow the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are, whether they're direct or just getting ready. Whether they're retrograde or just getting ready to turn retrograde. They make no traditional aspects between them. So all the aspects that we're going to be looking at this month have to do with aspects from Mercury, Venus, or Mars to each other or to the outer planets. So the first thing that we encounter is that on September 4th, what happens is that Mercury, retrograding Mercury, makes a trine to Jupiter. Let's look at the chart now for September 4th. And we can see that retrograde Mercury is at 15 degrees of Virgo, making a partile or same degree number, 15 degrees Virgo, Earth, to 15 degrees Taurus. And we notice also that the moon is right in that mix, joining up with Jupiter, so that there's a moon-Jupiter conjunction that is being trined by Mercury. And theoretically, this should be a great time for communication because Jupiter kind of greases the path and expands our ability to be communicators. Even though Mercury is retrograde, it's in its home sign and it's exalted also. It's just Mercury loves being in Virgo. And so we can look here at some really grounded and practical, useful communication that is still based on Jupiter's wanting to make things bigger, better, more, to go to bigger ideas, to kind of idealism and hope and kind of making things better than they are. And so I think September 4th is a very intriguing day because we do get that trine from Mercury to Jupiter. But remember, Mercury is retrograding, and Mercury actually trined Jupiter back at the beginning of August, on August 9th. And we're going to see this with aspects from both Mercury and Venus to the slower moving planets, where the aspects that they make are really part of a 1-2 or 1-2-3 process, because Mercury trined Jupiter back on August 9th. On September 4th, the chart that we're looking at now, Mercury trines Jupiter again, retrograde. And then once it turns direct, it trines Jupiter a third and final time on September 25th. And so we see a pattern here of something having been set up, whether we're looking at global or political events, or whether we're looking at our own individual lives, our work lives, our domestic lives, our relationship lives, our creative lives. And we can look back to the beginning of August and maybe see things that were set up with big ideas, Jupiter, that haven't come to fruition. And now they're coming back around, but they're still not reaching fruition. It's almost like we're getting more time to work on them, and then hopefully we can aim towards the manifestation by the 25th, when Mercury makes its third and final trine direct to Jupiter. So this is on September 4th, but we also have, this is the day when Jupiter, which is stationary, technically turns retrograde. But remember, we opened the month with Jupiter at 15 degrees 34 minutes. Here it is at 15 degrees 35 minutes, and it actually does not move even 1/60th of a degree, 1 minute of arc, for several days. In fact, it is by the 7th, it's still at 15 degrees 34 minutes, which is where it was on the 1st. And so for a week, Jupiter is within 1/60th of a degree of itself, almost no movement. And the reason why this is so important is that the slower moving the planet, the more inertia it has, the more power it has. The faster the moving planet, the more acute it is, the more the charge is in the moment. But the slower moving planets are beginning with Saturn and outward normally. Remember, Saturn in Greek is chronos, and when something is chronic, it's because it's slow moving, as opposed to the faster moving planets, which you might even say are acute. Something happens and then it goes away. So because Jupiter is barely moving, it's holding a lot more power. And the danger of that Mercury trining Jupiter at the beginning of the month, and even the Jupiter station is on the 4th, is that Jupiter is inflationary. It makes things bigger. It's a magnifying lens. It's expansive. And what happens is that when Jupiter becomes so powerful, we can become overconfident. We can become cocky. We can become hooked on some idea that's so big that it's impractical. In fact, with Mercury trining Jupiter at the beginning of the month, we can talk a really big, overblown story, but it may end up being a bit deflated over time as it comes back down to normal. Also, we can see on the 4th that the sun is moving into a square and a half, a sesqui-square with Pluto. And what's interesting about that is that Mercury is also moving into that same sesqui-square, the sun moving, of course, direct as it always does, and Mercury moving retrograde as it always does. As it is right now, sorry. But the intriguing thing here is that Mercury at the beginning of the month was trine Jupiter, and then it's moving toward a sesqui-square, square and a half, or sesqui-square is a square and a half, which is actually also 3/8, which is a trioctile. This is a harmonic aspect. But the danger is thinking that half squares and squares and a half, or square and a halves, the danger is thinking that they're like weak squares. They're not. They're just as strong, just as powerful as squares, but they're more precise, they're narrower, they're more focused, and they can be incredibly motivational. So what we're looking at here is Mercury's trine to Jupiter on the 4th, followed by its sesqui-square to Pluto on the 6th. We'll get to that in a moment. Meanwhile, we're looking at the sun making a sesqui-square to Pluto on the 5th, and it reaches its trine to Jupiter on the 8th. And so this trade-off between this flowing energy to Jupiter from both Mercury and the sun, and yet its disjointed motivational conflictive energy to Pluto becomes very, very powerful. And it's a very interesting dance that I think is both expansive, opportunistic, it's hopeful, and at the same time, there's a deep angst that makes it just not work the way that we want it to, and that kind of feeds into the frustration of the month that I think that we'll be feeling for much of the month. So let's move this ahead we're still on the 5th. Let's move it ahead to the 6th, and we can see that on the 6th, retrograde Mercury lines up with the sun. This is a Mercury cazimi, Mercury in the heart of the sun, where Mercury gains superpowers. And yet while it's doing it, it is also making that sesqui-square, both the sun on the day before and Mercury on the day after to Pluto. And so it's a very, very interesting little dance that we have here. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because there certainly is some complication here and some it's almost like if we make too many plans and we try to take too much, to try to take on too much, that we will have to deal with deeper consequences. The other thing that is occurring here is that Mars is also moving into another sesqui-square. So we have a series of sesqui-squares here. We have the Sun square and a half or sesqui-square to Pluto on the 5th. We have Mercury to Pluto on the 6th. And then we have Mars to Uranus on the 8th. And by the 8th, we have the moon also moved from Gemini into Cancer. The energy settles down a little bit emotionally, but Mars is square and a half to Uranus is very high-strung and agitating, and we may see things happening that maybe are like it's like that hair trigger. It's like, and it's not necessarily a gun here that I'm talking about. So I'm sorry for that image that I created, but it's about something happening that maybe wasn't ready to. It's like an accidental, it's like I think about doing something and I impulsively do it and then go, oh, shoot, maybe I shouldn't have. And again, it's Mars in judicious Libra that's making that sesqui-square to wild and crazy Uranus. But wild and crazy Uranus is, in a way, restrained by the determination of Taurus. And so again, we have this mixture of the earth determination of Taurus and the specific usefulness and practicality of the Mercury and the Sun in Virgo. And this becomes, I think, problematic. It becomes annoying, and I think it comes to a height on the 8th, when, of course, the Sun is also making that exact trine to Jupiter, which again is encouraging us to maybe go over that bridge too far, to overextend, and to take something maybe a step far. Maybe it was a really great idea, but then we push it too far, and it's like the balloon pops because we shouldn't have blown in that one last breath or two. So we need to be aware of sensible boundaries during this period of time. As we move on, we have a bit of quietness in the days ahead. I mean, there are things that are cooking. The moon moves into Leo, which is where Venus is. It does that on the 10th. And in fact, the moon will catch up to Venus on the 11th. And as the moon moves through Venus, it's going to square Jupiter and Uranus on the 11th and 12th. And so that may be a bit of conflict or agitation. But we also have the Sun, which, remember, it trined Jupiter on the 8th. The Sun, by the 10th, 11th, 12th even, the Sun is moving on in Virgo, moving toward its trine to Uranus. And the Sun trines Uranus exactly on the 15th. We'll get there in just a moment. But first we need to stop at the 14th, because the moon moves into Virgo either late on the 12th or early on the 13th, depending upon where you are. By noon on the 13th, and again, that's Pacific Daylight Time, the moon is joined up with Mercury. And then by the 14th at 6:39 p.m., the moon at 21 degrees and 58, almost 59 minutes, joins up with the Sun at 21 degrees and 59 minutes, also both in Virgo. And this new moon in Virgo is very important, but it's a relatively mild new moon, I believe. And it's mild because there's not a lot of aspects being made, except for the emphasis on the Sun's looming trine to Uranus. I mentioned that earlier. The Sun trines Uranus tomorrow on the 15th. But right now, the Sun is close to that trine. It's within a degree. And the moon will catch up with that trine to Uranus just a couple of hours after the new moon itself. Now, normally a sun and moon trine Uranus could be quite destabilizing, but this is in Earth. And in fact, it's also picking up on something else that I mentioned in the August forecast that I think will become increasingly important over the years ahead. In fact, all the way through 2026, 27, we're going to have a very slow moving but building energy that's a trine from Uranus here in Taurus to Pluto here in Capricorn. But by 2027, 28, Uranus will have moved into Jupiter. Uranus will have moved into Gemini, and Pluto will have moved back into Aquarius, and they will make an exact trine. But right now, what happens is this new moon is not only picking up on the trine to both Jupiter, which is already in the past, and to Uranus, which is in the near future, but it's also picking up on the trine that the moon will make to Pluto in roughly a half a day, because it's about 7 degrees. It's really only 6 degrees. Yeah, in about a half a day. So by tomorrow, by the morning of the 15th, that moon will be making its trine to Pluto, and then the sun will be picking up on its trine to Pluto, and that doesn't occur until the 20th. But what we're getting here is this grounded energy of what's like a grand trine in Earth, even though it's not an exact grand trine. And I think that this really gives us a very important overtone to this new moon that really brings in a grounded sense of practicality, and again, a sense of following things through, even if there are unexpected surprises, Uranus, even if there's some shock to what's going on. I think here that we're ultimately, the shock is basically like lightning, releasing the built-up tension that will create a calm after the storm. Now, it may take fully until 27, 28, when the Uranus makes that exact trine to Pluto, for the deeper level of this all to play through. We're talking now on a much longer trajectory. But as we look at September, I think this new moon is very significant because of that emphasis on that grand Earth trine. Also note that the new moon is approaching an opposition to Neptune, which is just a reminder that we're not going to get away from not really knowing what the hell's going on. I mean, again, the moon will reach the opposition to Neptune. It's about 5.5, about 10 hours, something like that, after the new moon. The sun will reach its opposition to Neptune not until the 19th, but we're still getting that as a feeling in the background. The one thing, though, that is really still significant, the Venus square to Jupiter on the 15th. Venus, and I don't think I mentioned this. Somehow we let this slip right through, and I need to back up for a moment just and talk about Venus, because Venus retrograde. And I apologize for having this slipping through and not mentioning this sooner. But, you know, we've talked about the Venus process here for a few months now, that Venus actually entered Leo back at the beginning of June, and it entered its shadow mid-June, actually June 19th, the shadow being the area where it goes through, retrogrades back, and then goes direct through a third and final time. Venus backed up to 12 degrees of Leo and 12 minutes and turned direct on September 3rd. So Venus went retrograde on July 22nd, and then it turned direct on September 3rd. I failed to mention that before, but Venus it turned direct at 12 degrees and 12 minutes on the 3rd, and here we are almost 2 weeks later, and Venus has barely moved 2 degrees, because when a planet stations to go direct or retrograde, it has to stop, change directions. It moves very slowly at first, and Venus is moving very, very slowly, which is why since its direct turn on September 3rd, Venus has made no aspects, but the aspect that it's pushing toward is an aspect that it actually made back on August 22nd, and that is that Venus squared Jupiter then. And now, as Venus is turned direct on the 3rd, Venus will square Jupiter the second, and in this case a final time. It only does a 1-2 because it made that first it made the first square to Jupiter just as it was getting ready to turn retrograde, and so it makes an odd thing. Normally we think of the direct retrograde direct as a 1-2-3, but in fact with the Venus to Jupiter, Venus squared Jupiter on August 22nd, and it squares Jupiter exactly a second time on the 16th. What that means is during this new moon, late in the day on the 14th, Venus is only 1 degree away from squaring Jupiter, which gives us this, again, the sense of the attraction, Venus, to the idea of that which is, great and wonderful. And again, we have this sense of optimism or even hope, which may unfortunately get overinflated because of Jupiter's involvement. But all in all, I think that this is a relatively it's a relatively tame, that's the word I was looking for, new moon, and in some ways that makes it very powerful because it gives us a sense of clarity. It gives, if as long as we don't get attracted or what's the word I'm looking for? As long as we don't get misled by that sense of we can do anything, that whole sense of overconfidence, that sense of being attracted to things that we can't possibly have or won't ever reach, that can lead to later disappointment. That's the Venus square Jupiter that I'm talking about. But if we can keep that in mind, we have the ability to really focus our energies and to really create intentions through very, very small actions. That whole idea of making a ritual like priming the pump. It's not just making a wish list. It's not just stating an intention. It's not just focusing on what you want and then blowing out the candle and releasing the energy. Reality needs some clues. It's like priming the pump with water. We have to take action. And that's what ritual really is. And a new moon ritual in Virgo says do something specific, Virgo, and do it small. Do something that's practical. Do something that's useful. Do something where our energy is focused like a laser that actually creates a motion that can become part of a daily routine, a daily ritual, because that new moon in Virgo likes that sense of the ritualization of the daily practice, and that helps us manifest what can hopefully come into fruition, not only as Venus moves out of its shadow, as Mercury moves out of its shadow, but also as we move toward the culmination at the Aries full moon on the 29th. Now, the other thing that we have happening here on just right around the new moon is the fact that Mercury has completed its retrograde cycle. It technically doesn't turn direct until the afternoon of the 15th. But here at the new moon on the 14th, Mercury is at 8 degrees of Virgo and 3 minutes. It's not making any exact aspects. It was retrograding back toward an opposition to Saturn, but it doesn't get get there. And so I don't see this as a negative impact on a negative influence on Mercury. Mercury station with the new moon in Virgo, since Mercury rules Virgo. In a way, it's Mercury that's going to be carrying out some of that energy of the lunation of the Virgo new moon, and that Mercury technically turns direct at 1:21 p.m. on the 15th. And the and the thing though here is that on the 15th, we can see that at noon on the 15th, Mercury is still at 8 degrees of Virgo, but it has not moved forward very much. And so on the 15th, we do have Mercury stationary direct, which means that it is picking up forward motion now. We have the exact trine from the Sun to Uranus. And again, this is about the expression of that energy. We're really feeling that grand trine Earth energy, where hopefully, if we use this energy right, we can break through rather than break up, because remember, Uranus shatters whatever the walls of restriction were. And so when it does that, we can something can totally break down, lightning can strike, and if it strikes an electrical plant, it can put that electrical plant out of business, it can destroy it, it can create a fire that burns things down. Or it can simply break through, maybe breaking down a dam that allows the water to flow again. And so we want to look for ways in which we can move slowly rather than crazy fast to make the most of the building energy rather than just ignoring the potential for that dam to burst and the water to flood. So we want to try to move that energy. And here on the 16th, the Sun's trine to Uranus gives us that opportunity to do that. Incidentally, this is the same day that Venus is making the exact square to Jupiter, again warning us about overdoing, overinflation, overindulgence. As we move on, and by the way, by the 16th, we can also see that the moon moving through Libra is lining up with Mars midday, and which can stimulate our emotions a bit, can create impulsive emotional expression. But I don't think this is going to be out of the question that day, or I don't think it's going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think we're going to do anything really, really problematic. Although if things seem problematic on the new moon, it will be basically because something needed to relieve the tension. There was tension that needed to be broken through and relieved, and in the long run, hopefully it'll work out for the best. By the 19th, we have the Sun opposing Neptune, and this is a once-a-year aspect. The Sun's opposition to Neptune is about either misleading others or being misled by others. But it's also about teaching spiritual truths to others or learning spiritual truths. And here we need to be careful. You see, because whereas Uranus breaks through the boundaries or the wall of Saturn, Neptune just fuzzes those walls out. And sometimes we don't even realize that that's happened. And so when the Sun is opposing Neptune, because oppositions are often expressed as relationships or through projection, we need to just pay attention to our dreams and our illusions and our spiritual practices that we might take as absolute reality, when in fact they're more things to lead us along a path that hopefully moves us in the right direction. But we can be deluded when it comes to spiritual truths. We can accept things as true that are really not true at all, and often they can get us into very, very deep trouble, because Neptune can be associated with delusions. But Neptune is only difficult, problematic, delusional when we're not working with the energy and integrating it. Because if we are integrating it, then this is the highest form of spirituality, of non-egoic states. This is the highest form of imagination and creativity. But remember, the world is full of a lot of people who are in deep psychological trouble because the delusions that they have, they believe to be true. Whereas a poet or an artist might take these delusions as illusions and imagination and use that to inform their art and still be able to get by in the world of Saturn and the three-dimensional world of things. So that's the 19th. And we also have Mars making an exact quincunx to Jupiter on the 19th, which again is a reminder about not overdoing. This is a theme for the month of September, is that it seems it keeps on continuing. It continues to seem as if there's something happening that's really important in the moment and we want to make it into everything. But it's not. It's another thing that feeds the larger issue. And as long as we keep these other issues, these long-term goals in check, or as long as we stay on track to those longer-term goals, we'll be okay. But if we get swept up in this Mars quincunx Jupiter, again, we'll lose control of how much is enough and how much is too much. And so that becomes a background theme for the entire month. That's on the 19th. On the 20th, by the way, and you can see here, even on the 19th, the sun is moving closer and closer to the exact trine to Pluto. Remember, we talked about the sun's trine to Uranus back on the 15th. And in fact, we also talked the sun's trine to Uranus on the 15th was important because now the sun by the 20th makes its exact trine to Pluto, kind of completing off the energy on this practical grand Earth trine, even though the energy of Uranus is kind of recessing, it's fading, it's de-attenuating, it's fading off into the distance. But meanwhile, through the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and culminating on the 20th, the sun's trine to Pluto gives us the power to go deep, to bring that energy up from the absolute depths, the hidden portions of the psyche, the hidden portions of the universe, of the cosmos, and really pull that energy. And the sun's light shines the light of awareness into the darkness. And once we can see things that were hidden, we can then work with them. But when they're hidden, they're frightening, and they can have power over us. In fact, if you think of the unconscious in a way as the underworld of the mind, when things are in our unconscious mind, they have more power. We don't know that they're influencing everything we say or do, but whether it's through therapy or self meditation or other human growth realizations and awareness practices to increase our awareness, as we make the unconscious conscious, shine light, the sun, and illuminate the sun into the underworld, the unconscious, we then, as we see these things, even however frightening they were when we didn't understand them, they become something that we can work with. And so this is a very, very powerful period of time because as the sun makes that trine to Pluto, we're given an opportunity to do deep and powerful transformation if we're willing to go there. And where's there? Into the unconscious, into the place where we're not in control, into those places where we're facing maybe demons that are buried and hidden in our own world that we project onto other people that get us into trouble. And this Pluto being illuminated by the sun gives us a chance to work with those energies, I think, in a very positive manner. As we move through the, and by the way, during the same period of time, we also have the moon moving on the 20th, on Wednesday the 20th, into Sagittarius, which is now again bringing the mind into that Jupiterian state of encouraging the movement beyond our boundaries, but to do it in a way with Jupiter and Taurus that's still practical, determined that we get to where it is that we're going. By the 22nd, we have Mars, which at the beginning of the month or actually it was back around the 8th it made a square and a half to Uranus. Now Mars is making a square and a half to Saturn. And on the 22nd, that square and a half is exact. And once again, we have this whole thing about hitting the gas, Mars, about going somewhere, doing something, and yet Saturn, in some strange way, as the authority, is not letting us past unless we have all of our ducks in order, and we might run into restrictions if we've misused that Mars, or if we've misused the power of Pluto. Here, Saturn might say, nope, not so fast, you're not going to get away with this that easily. And in fact, we can see that Mars is coming into an opposition with Chiron. That's not exact until the 24th, but even here on the 22nd, it's still only, a degree, a little bit, about a degree and a half from being exact. And Saturn is a square and a half from Mars. But remember that Chiron, and we talked about this last month because there was an exact Chiron-Saturn half square that's still within orb. It's still only, the Chiron to Saturn is still about a degree and a half. So that Saturn is really agitating that opposition between Mars and Chiron, which is showing us what our individual wounds are. It's showing us the limitations of what we can learn or what we can teach. And we have to follow the rules of Saturn, even when we're not completely sure what they are, because once again, Saturn in Pisces, the limits of the law are certainly fuzzy when Saturn is moving through Pisces. The other thing on the 22nd is we have another square and a half between the Sun and Jupiter. And again, these sesqui-squares between Mars and Saturn, between the Sun and Jupiter, even between Mercury and Pluto. Remember, we talked about that one as one that was going to repeat. I don't know if we mentioned that or not, actually. Mercury, because of its retrograde energy, made a square and a half with Pluto back on August 8th. And then, I'm pretty sure we did mention this, and then on its retrograde, it made a square and a half, a sesqui-square, with Pluto on September 6th. Now, on the 23rd, as Mercury is going direct, Mercury will make its third and final sesqui-square to Pluto. And so between Mercury's square and a half to Pluto, where communication is stirring up the underworld, maybe in a way that we wish it wasn't or we wish we weren't, as Mercury is making at sesqui-square to Pluto, we also have over these same days, we have Mars making a sesqui-square to Saturn and the Sun making a sesqui-square to Jupiter, all on the 22nd and 23rd, and this is not a lot of fun. I think that, in fact, we might be motivated to take care of things that have not been attended to, not because we want to, but because we have to. Sometimes with the sesqui-squares, we don't have a choice. Circumstances force our hand or force something to happen, and I think we may be seeing some of this during this period of time. The other thing here to note is that on the 22nd, very late at night at 11:49 p.m., so for many places it won't happen until early in the morning on the 23rd, the Sun moves out of Virgo and into Libra. This is the autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere, the vernal or spring equinox in the southern hemisphere, and this is a season change, and now we have the Sun and Mars and the South Node all in Libra, emphasizing that dance that we do with others, the relationship dance, as Mars is pushing toward its opposition to Chiron in Aries, and this is about the self and the other, that dance of how much assertion, how much aggression, how to define the balance in relationship with Mars, far away from its home sign in Aries, and Chiron, basically those personal wounds or those emotional things that we can't quite figure out how to make work in harmony with the Mars that's pushing up against those uncomfortable boundaries. The saving grace in this, or one saving grace, is that on the 23rd, we have Venus making a trine with Chiron, which basically allows us to use love as a healing agent. Now, again, Venus, when in its retrograde direct in its direct retrograde, direct process, Venus made a trine with Chiron back on August 14th, just as, that whole process of change of directions. It was like Venus trined Chiron on the 14th, and then it trines Chiron again, moving direct on the 23rd, and it only has those two connections that it makes this time round. And the Venus trine Chiron may bring up stuff that was brought up for us back in August, when the retrograde Venus was making that same trine. And so it's important here to know that it's the Venus in Leo, the displays of creative self-expression of who we are, that and being true to ourselves, the integrity, because Venus is not only making a trine to Chiron, but it's also making a sextile to Mars, and that Venus in its sextile to Mars is very, very close. Venus to Mars is 1 degree orb, but that means that Venus, if we just look at the Mars-Chiron opposition, that again, the Mars-Chiron opposition is exact on the 24th. And if we look at that, we're reminded of the fact that Saturn is at the point of Thor, that uncomfortable point that's a half square to Chiron and a square and a half to Mars. Meanwhile, Venus is at the point of Thales, the point that's sextile Mars and trine Chiron. And so Venus becomes the key to releasing the energy. And I think that that is potentially sweet if we're able to have integrity as we express ourselves in a true and clear manner with integrity. That's the 24th. And by the way, on the 24th, we also have the Sun making a quincunx with Saturn, 1 degree of Libra to 1 degree of Pisces. And once again, this is an adjustment, a discomfort between shining that light and trying to be diplomatic, trying to see things from the other side. And yet Saturn in Pisces in some way fuzzes that out, makes it difficult. And it's like we're trying to get there, but we can't quite get there. We do have Mercury going direct, moving into that trine with Jupiter. And again, we talked about that earlier because Mercury trined Jupiter back on August 9th, then again on September 4th, and now it's third and final time on the 25th of September on Monday. And again, when we have these double dates or triple dates, we always try in our mind by going back on our calendar or our diary and seeing what was going on then, what energetically, maybe the events were very different, but energetically there's something now that is playing through. And it's important to understand that as both Mercury and Venus are moving direct and making their final contacts with planets that they made earlier, direct, earlier retrograde, and now on its third and final time direct, that it's cleaning up old karma, cleaning up stuff, and it may feel like we're getting somewhere, but that's the illusion of September, because even though Mercury and Venus are moving forward and cleaning up old business, they're still in their shadows, meaning that they're not in new ground. We're covering old stuff, and on top of that, except for Mars, everything else that can go retrograde is, because we have Pluto retrograde, Neptune retrograde, Chiron retrograde, Uranus retrograde, Saturn retrograde, and Jupiter retrograde. And so on a much deeper level, we're not making the progress that we think we need to make. And that will actually occur through the rest of the year, because all these planets eventually turn direct. Pluto is the first to turn direct in early October, and then Saturn in early November. Then Neptune turns direct in early December, and Chiron turns direct later in December, and also Jupiter turns direct the end of December, and then Uranus turns direct not until January. But by early next year, early 2024, all those outer planets are moving direct, and we're going to feel that deeper energy now pushing us. We can't fight this tide. It's the heavyweights. And by next January, February, March, April, all those planets are going to be pulling us into the future as they move out of their shadows into new territory. But right now, we have Venus and Mercury both moving direct, feeling like we're accomplishing things, but they're really tying up old loose ends rather than moving forward into unexplored or untraveled territory. And in fact, let's, while we're here, just mention that Mercury doesn't leave its shadow until September 29th at 11 p.m. So you can really think September 30th for practical purposes. You can actually think October, because on October 4th, Mercury moves into Libra, and that's going to feel like it's moving into new territory. Meanwhile, Venus, which entered its shadow back on June 19th, and it turned direct back at the beginning of September on the 3rd, Venus leaves its shadow at 28.5 degrees of Leo on October 7th. But it leaves Leo and enters Virgo on the following day, the 8th. So by the second week of October, both Mercury and Venus are both moving into new territory. And then again, also by October 10th, Pluto is the first of the outer planets to turn direct. And remember, Pluto then pretty quickly by January moves back into Aquarius. That's a story for later on. Let's finish up the end of September. But you can see the dance that we have this month is really fascinating just because of the movement of the planets. And meanwhile, through all of this, Mars is still moving quickly compared to everything else, gaining territory. And on the 25th, we have Mercury making that third and final trine to Jupiter. We also have the moon having moved through Capricorn. In fact, it lined up with Pluto on the 24th, intensifying everything. And as the moon moved through Capricorn, it also re-stimulated that grand Earth trine. But the only thing left now in Earth Virgo is Mercury, because even the sun has moved on into Libra. So that energy is really beginning to dissipate. By the 27th, we have another quincunx, and that's Mercury quincunxing Chiron. And again, this is Mercury moving direct and cleaning up old business, because Mercury at 18 degrees of Virgo quincunxing Chiron at 18 degrees of Aries. That same quincunx occurred in mid-August, August 16th, and then on the retrograde, it occurred on August 30th, both back in August. But by the 27th of September, once again, it's like we can express ourselves, Mercury. We can communicate with very exacting words in a way that we want to teach something to someone, or we want to heal some energy, only to find that it makes matters worse. Does that mean we shouldn't say anything? No, it just means that we need to make use of that Mercury in Virgo by being very careful, by treading on other people's territories with great awareness, trepidation, and even compassion. It's not just about delivering the truth and making things better, because if the truth hurts so much that it makes things worse, well, then we haven't helped anything at all. And that's the nature of the irritating quincunx, especially when trickster Mercury is involved. We move on. The moon is moved into Pisces, and by the way, late on Tuesday night, the 26th, and the morning of Wednesday, the 27th, the moon, as it moves into Pisces, depending on where you are, lines up with Saturn, maybe kind of gives us a sense of heaviness, weightiness in some way, but we're moving toward the Aries full moon that's exact at 2:57 a.m., and that's on the morning of the 29th here in Seattle. So this is at 2:57 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. The moon at 6 degrees of Aries is exactly opposed the sun at 6 degrees of Libra. Now, again, full moons are times of culmination, but this is a special one because the sun in Libra is in its fall. Interesting that we have the sun in its fall in Libra and Mars in its exile or detriment, because Mars is at home in Aries and the sun is exalted in Aries. Remember, exalted is like a place that's not our home, where we're a special guest. And so the sun and Mars are both, it's not that they're weaker, it's just that they're harder to make work. And as the moon in Aries opposes the sun, that relationship axis is pushed once again. How do I feel? How do I respond to something versus how do I react in my gut? How do I temper my emotional reaction with the awareness of that sun in Libra that has compassion for both sides of whatever the issue is? Now, these may be internal issues where I can't make a decision whether I should do this or that, but it more often is projected in some way. So there's something or someone or some circumstance in my life that is opposing in some way what it is I feel I want or need, the moon in Aries on the inside. The other thing about this full moon, interestingly enough, is that it is quincunx. Well, it's not quincunx. The Mars, which is just past its opposition to Chiron, is just coming into its quincunx with Uranus. Now, remember, Mars is exalted in Aries. The moon is in Aries. We look at that Mars, and Mars making a quincunx with Uranus. Once again, we have that kind of impulsive, even though Mars in Libra usually isn't impulsive, we have that sense of wanting to jump, wanting to do something, wanting to light the fuse, wanting to start the project, wanting to, whatever the action is, to take it, that may or may not be advised, because that quincunx basically says to Uranus, there's a reaction that we may not expect. Very interesting full moon. By the way, we also have at this time not only the Mercury, not only the Mars making the quincunx to or coming into that quincunx to Uranus, and that's not exact until the 30th. But we also have Mercury coming into its trine with Uranus. And remember, that's another one of those, actually, that's not a 1, 2, 3, because Mercury never reached the trine to Uranus before it turned retrograde. Because remember, Mercury is now coming out of its shadow, and meaning that Mercury, as of the 29th, is hitting degrees that it hadn't reached before. And so in some ways, going all the way back to when Mercury turned, when I get something in my eye. There. Sorry about that. The Mercury trine Uranus almost occurred when Mercury first turned retrograde back on August 23rd. It did that at 21 degrees 51 minutes of Virgo. It almost trined Uranus, but it didn't. And so there wasn't that intellectual, mental communication breakthrough. And now that Mercury is now making that exact trine, or it reaches that exact trine, and it does that on the 30th, but we're already feeling it at the full moon, but it makes the exact trine on the 30th. It's like this is a communication breakthrough. This is the moment that we've been waiting for. And in fact, I think the full moon is not the active point, even though it sets it up. I really think the action occurs more over the weekend or late on Friday. the full moon itself is early in the morning on Friday, and maybe some of the events are pushed already on Friday, but it's almost like it's over the weekend. And on the 30th, when we first of all, just after the full moon, we have Venus squaring Uranus, and we talked about that again. That's the attraction that was the first time back in the beginning of July. Venus squared Uranus. Then on August 9th, and then for the third and final time on the 29th. But that's playing during this full moon, and it's exact in the morning on September 29th, attracting us to make that break. It's teasing us. And again, just because something looks good, just because we're attracted to something that we've never been attracted to, or something that's totally different or out of our normal territory, beyond our normal limitations, just because we're attracted to it doesn't mean we should act on it. And yet Mercury, coming into that trine to Uranus on the 30th, is really highlighting the Uranus, and it's saying, yeah, talk about it. But also on the 30th, we have the Sun making a square and a half to Uranus. Oh my God, Uranus right now is so much in the crosshairs that it's like this September 30th and on into the beginning of October, it's like everything is changing. Stuff is happening here on the 30th. Even though it's a Saturday, if it's newsworthy stuff, we may not know about it or may not play through until Monday. But the Sun sesqui-square to Uranus, and on top of that, Mars is making that quincunx to Uranus. So we have four major aspects to Uranus, all on the last day of the month. We have we have Mars making a quincunx to Uranus, the Sun making a square and a half, a sesqui-square, or a trioctile 3/8 to Uranus. We have Mercury making a trine to Uranus and Venus making a square to Uranus. And what do they all have in common? Uranus. So expect the unexpected, and when the unexpected occurs, roll with it. The more tense, the more fearful we are, the more rigid we are when the lightning strikes, the more it can harm us. The more fluid we are, the more adaptable we are, the more flexible we are, the more we're breathing with the energy, the more we're letting that energy come in and ripple through and go out, the better we will be in the long run. It's an incredible month, but it's so peculiar because the base notes are like they're on vacation. I mean, granted, Uranus is a base note, but it's the high frequency action against Uranus or toward Uranus. Remember, this is the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, each making an aspect with Uranus. It's not Jupiter or Saturn or Uranus or Neptune or Pluto making an aspect with Uranus. So Uranus is highlighted, but it's highlighted in high frequency ways. And so it's a very, very potent month. All I can say is that for the entire month, it's really important to stay flexible. I think I said that last month also, because the wheels are still in spin, and yet we need to be open to change, and we need to be open to the lightning striking. We're not going to stop it. We're not going to prevent it from striking. And so as it does, we need to breathe. We need to when the lightning strikes and the light goes on, for a moment in the middle of the night, it's like we can see everything. Rather than closing our eyes and not wanting to look, rather than seeing it and then at dark again going, well, I'm glad it's dark, I can't see anything anymore. Rather than that, we need to hold that awareness, because resolution, enlightenment, positive energy, growth, integration all come from the compassion that develops when we hold a point of view or a reference that's outside our normal place. That's what September is about. September is moving us into the next place. It's like being in a rocket ship and being blasted forward, and yet we're not being blasted anywhere, but we feel like we're accelerating, but nothing's changing on the deep level. But on on, but it feels like we're getting the G's, the gravity is building up, and it's kind of like we can feel the wind in our sails and we can see the currents, but it seems like we're not going anywhere. So we just need to keep in mind the big picture. The long haul here is not what it is that's going on day by day by day. And if we stay open to what's going on day by day by day, if we embrace it, if we interact with it, rather than shutting down or rather than going to one extreme. You see, lightning loves extremes. Lightning is Uranus. And lightning can't strike unless there's extreme energy. And of course, and I know I've spoken about this before, we live in times where everybody's gone extreme on every issue, which is why there's so much bifurcation, so much polarity, so much tension. And so during this month, we're reminded that the concept of the Hindu and Buddhist practice of finding the middle ground, the enlightenment of taking that middle path, becomes more and more important, maintaining that sense of balance, thinking about that grand trine. Even at the end of the month, as Mercury is trining Uranus, it's moving toward a trine to Pluto that's not exact until October. But again, it's highlighting that grand Earth trine. It's important that we keep our feet on the ground. That's it for now. More than ever, think cosmically. Think cosmically as you can. Think, push that energy intellectually out, in, down, all directions as far as you can. Think cosmically, but act locally. I'm Rick Levine. Be safe.